Hi and good afternoon. I'm Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton. I want to welcome you to our very important discussion today about voting safely in this year's election. You know, we've gotten so many questions on this topic. I'm very excited to have two real experts in the field here joining us today. Chris Piper, who's the Commissioner of the Virginia Department of Elections, and Keith Scarborough, who's the Secretary of the Prince William County Electoral Board. They'll be here to answer all of our questions, and hopefully we will leave here much better informed. Because no matter who you vote for, I want to make sure that you have all the information that you need about Virginia's new election laws, special COVID-19 precautions that are in place, and all the different options that you have to cast your ballot in this year. This year, because of new laws in place, we're seeing more Virginians voting early than ever before. Right now, you can vote in person without an excuse at your local registrar's office. And soon there will be additional satellite locations for in-person voting across your county or city. You can also vote by mail without an excuse. To request your ballot, you can visit elections.virginia.gov. According to the Virginia Public Access Project, almost 400,000 Virginians have already voted early, and more than 320,000 absentee ballots have already been returned to local registrars, more than the entire early and absentee vote in 2016. And we still have, more than 4 weeks to go. And of course, you can still vote in person on Election Day on November 3rd. I've already cast my ballot and it was easy, convenient, and safe. I hope that everyone listening in will make a plan to vote and do whatever way is best for you. We're fortunate to be joined by two individuals today who are experts in everything you need to know about voting this year and can answer all of your questions. I encourage you to leave your questions in the comment section and we can get to them during our discussion. I'll now turn it over to our guests for a brief introduction. Chris, let's start with you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's a great pleasure to be here and I appreciate the invitation. I think you summed it up pretty perfectly. Virginia was already anticipating the accessible ballot with early voting opening up this year, and then several other changes have come about as a result of COVID. And the General Assembly met this summer and adopted some new laws specifically for this November general election. As you mentioned, we've had great turnout and already about 390,000 in-person voters as of yet last night. So we are seeing a great amount of enthusiasm, and thanks to folks like Keith and the others out in the field and in the Commonwealth, voting is going very, very smoothly even with these changes, and voters are enjoying the new process. So I'm excited to be here to help educate and provide your constituents with the information they need to vote safely this year.
Yes, because elections in Virginia, they're governed and regulated by the state, but they're actually administered at the local level. So Keith, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing in Prince William County.
Sure. So first, thank you, Congresswoman, for the invitation. And it truly has been an exciting period. So I've been on the electoral board here in the county since 2007. So I've worked through 3 presidential elections. And they're all a little bit crazy in one way or another, but this one is even more so. As a commissioner mentioned, we've had a record number of people that have already voted. We have implemented 3 early vote centers in Prince William County, and we'll be adding 5 more for the last 2 weeks of the election. And the voters have taken advantage of this. We have already had 26,000 people vote early on the machines in a vote center. We've had almost 8,000 ballots returned to us at dropboxes around the county, and we have more than 5,000 mail-in ballots that have been returned. So there's a lot of interest, not only in Prince William but across the county. And I know every jurisdiction in the 10th congressional district is working hard to make sure that the election runs as smoothly as possible.
So that actually dovetails nicely into my first question. We're seeing in Virginia unprecedented interest in early voting in person and by mail. So what measures are local registrars taking to ensure that they're ready for all these to adapt to this shift in voting behavior?
Well, we knew even before the pandemic hit that there was going to be a large increase in absentee voting just because of the changes the General Assembly made back in the spring. and with no excuse early voting for every voter in Virginia. So we had already made plans to ramp up our options for voters in the county. Back in January and February, when we were starting all this, we had actually talked about having temporary voting locations at some of the commuter lots in the county. There's still a large number of people that drive outside of Prince William to vote. And so we were thinking about locating voting locations at the commuter lots from 3 o'clock until 8 to catch all the voters that are coming home. And then the pandemic hit, and so then we had to start beginning to respond to a new normal. So we have almost always, at least since I've been on the board, had multiple early voting sites, and we opened 3 on September 18th, and then we have plans for adding 5 more. So back in July, we were actually, the Board of Supervisors in every county and city had to do the planning. We had to notify the state of how many voting locations we're going to have, where they're going to be located, how we're going to address all the security interests. So we were ready to go back in July, because we knew we were going to have this big avalanche of voters.
Wonderful. And related to that, I guess that we get a lot of questions about voting by mail or absentee ballots being returned by mail. What are you doing? What are we doing at the state level and the local level to ensure that mail-in ballots are received on time and are counted? And how are you working with local post offices? And I guess also, if you might be able to talk just a little bit, Chris, maybe about what Virginia's laws are for pre-processing and what happens when a ballot is actually received at the registrar before Election Day.
Sure, absolutely. So we actually have a wonderful relationship with our regional representatives at the United States Postal Service. The state, we meet with them every other week, and we'll actually be increasing that as we get closer to the election. Actually, starting this week, we'll be meeting weekly and more if needed. We talk consistently about the issues that we come into that come up, and are constantly trying to address those issues. I will say this, the State Board of Elections passed some regulations this year that are absolutely critical. The first one being requiring all localities to include an intelligent mail barcode on their return envelopes and all the absentee envelopes. So you can actually go to our website or go to the locality website and track the ballot as it's making its way through the process. That's huge. It's really important for the individual voters to know where their ballot is throughout the process. You can also check on our citizen portal to see that your application has been received and processed, and then once the ballot is returned, you can see that it's been processed. Those are important parts of the entire voting mechanism. The other thing that was done was requiring election mail insignia on all of our envelopes. This is a print that's on the ballots that helps, on the ballot envelopes that helps the post office identify them as official election mail. And that official election mail then gets prioritized by those local election offices. Some other things that had changed, we've moved back the deadline for requesting an absentee ballot, recognizing the fact that 7 days prior to election was not enough time for the ballot to make it to the voter and then back to the office in time. And I think even more critical, the General Assembly extended the amount of time that a ballot can be returned to the office. So as long as it's postmarked on election day, it can be received in the office of the General Registrar by noon on Friday, November 6th and still be counted. Previously, it had to be in the office of the General Registrar by 7 p.m. on election day. So this will capture a lot of ballots that were being returned late, and they'll still get the opportunity to cast their ballot. You mentioned pre-processing, and I think that's a critical thing to understand. We're going to hear a lot of talk over the next few weeks, and justifiably so, that election night is now more like election week or maybe even election month. And that is true for a lot of states. In Virginia, as I just mentioned, a ballot can be returned up till Friday at noon. So we may have postponed results because if there's a close race in any congressional district or even at the presidential level. it will take some time for those ballots to come in and those ballots to be counted. That said, in Virginia, unlike other states, or some other states, we can pre-process the ballots as they come in. What that means is if you sent in your absentee ballot through the mail today and it's received by the office in the next couple of days, they can actually start the process of verifying that all the information is correct. Once they've verified that, they can actually run the ballots through the machines. They're not tabulating the results yet. They're simply running the ballots through the machines. Getting that done ahead of time before the election will allow us to report a whole lot more results on election night than we would in some other states, which aren't allowed to touch those ballot envelopes until, in some cases, election day. So we're in a little bit of a better position here in Virginia, but we still anticipate that, especially in close races, we may not have the results for several days after the election.
Great. And I just have a couple real quick follow-ups based on that. You spoke about a barcode that allows voters to track their ballot as it's making its way through the process. So that barcode, is it individualized to the voter?
Yes, that's correct. So when a ballot is printed and the envelope is printed, the barcode is applied to the voter and that ballot itself. So when it's run and scanned through at the post office sorting facilities, it will be tracked as having gone through that processing facility. And so you can actually go onto our website, and if you go to elections.virginia.gov/absentee, you can type in your name and your address, and you'll be able to track the ballot through the process.
And then I guess on the registrar side, when the ballot is received by the local registrar, you are able to scan that barcode and know that that ballot that's being returned is from a particular voter, and that it's not somebody who's already voted in person or something like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there are a number of place cards built into the whole absentee voting system to make sure that the ballot is mailed to the individual. First of all, they have to request a ballot. We don't just mail them to every registered voter. And there's a personalized number code, as Chris mentioned. And then when that's checked in, we check it in, essentially like I was walking into a precinct on election day. They check it in, they say, this is the ballot. This is Keith Scarborough. He requested a ballot. This is the number that we assigned to him when we mailed the ballot to him. And when I check in, or when that ballot is checked in, then that automatically goes into the database. And so that notifies everybody that I've submitted an absentee ballot. And if I go into my precinct on election day and check in and try and vote, when they call me up on the poll book, it'll say, no, Keith, you already submitted an absentee ballot, so you can't vote twice in Virginia. So yeah, there are lots of safeguards.
I don't think you can vote twice anywhere. At least I hope not.
That's our hope, right?
Great. And relatedly, Chris, about the postmark. Now, my understanding, or one of the things that I've heard repeated a couple of times, is that when you have third-class mail, the post office may not postmark it. And now that we have postage prepaid envelopes for elections in Virginia, that third-class mail may make it so that these envelopes are not postmarked, and then we don't know if they arrive at the registrar after election day. We don't want them to not be counted. So have you made arrangements with the local postmasters about what they're going to do with that mail?
Sure. Yeah. So actually, we use first class mail here in Virginia, and it's and with prepaid postage, we have worked out with the post office that they are to be postmarking every ballot, especially if it says the official election mail on there. However, there are times when a postmark doesn't make it onto the envelope itself. And the State Board of Elections passed a regulation that will allow ballots that come in and are delivered by mail after the election through November 6th at noon. If they're missing a postmark, they would still be counted. Because that's not the fault of the voter, it's themselves. But we have been working very closely with the United States Postal Service to ensure that they are postmarking these ballots as they're coming in, and it's a really critical part of the process. And I would just echo what Keith was saying. The security and processes that we've put in place. We've thought of everything. So I assure you, if you're a voter that hears about some sort of scam that could go out there, we've already thought of it, and we've put in protections to prevent it from happening.
Great, thank you. And Keith, one of the questions that we also get a lot from our constituents is, what happens if they get an absentee ballot and then they make a mistake voting on it? Like they might vote for the wrong candidate, or and I've seen we've had a lot of recounts here in Virginia, and I see that in Newport News, in that race where they had to pull a film canister out of a bowl to decide it, that there were a number of ballots where somebody had voted and then crossed it out and then wrote no this one and darkened that oval. I mean, obviously the optical scanner is going to kick that out, but what can somebody do if they realize they made that mistake but they have an absentee ballot? What would you advise that person to do?
Well, the most important thing would be to contact their election office immediately and explain what happened. If there's sufficient time to do it, we will send out another absentee ballot to the voters so they can mark their ballot correctly and send it in. Now, that of course depends on how early it is in the process, and one of the messages that we try and convey all the time to voters is, look, when you get your absentee ballot in the mail, open it right away, look at it, read through the instructions, and if you have any questions, call immediately. Don't wait until October 31st. If you make a mistake and need a replacement ballot, call immediately so that we can help you out. But we have a lot more options to help voters early in the process than we do at the very end.
Great. So one of the things that people are concerned about a lot as well is security, and we already talked about some of the security protocols in place to ensure that there's not fraud in voting by mail and things like that. But can you also talk about some of the other security that you guys have in place, to make sure that your voter rolls are safe, cybersecurity, electronic poll books, things like that? I mean, we hear these stories about, and I know that in Virginia we have paper backups for our ballots, which I think is great and best practice. But electronic poll books where people go on election day and they are taken down and they're not able to be used. Do we have paper backups for those, or what are we doing in Virginia to ensure that we have redundancies and security in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year the General Assembly passed legislation requiring paper poll books backups in every precinct. So if the electronic poll book were to go down, voting can continue as normal based on using the paper poll books. So that's a protection that we've put in place that I think will give people a lot of security and assurance. Really after 2016, election security has been the primary focus of election administrators across the country. And Congress actually did provide some funding for election security. And we've utilized that over the last couple of years to really shore up our already strong security posture. But certain things that we've done, which is implementing multi-factor authentication with regard to our voter registration database, and then other security precautions that we've put into place. In fact, I think by far the biggest thing that we've been able to do at the state level and around the country is shoring up our partnerships at all levels of government. So with the localities, our state partners, and then our federal partners. In fact, I'm actually working from home today because I live down the street from the FBI office, and I'm meeting with the FBI this afternoon to talk about threats and things that are going on. Mm-hmm. Nothing to worry about, but just information that's important for us to be hearing and sharing in that partnership. On Thursday, we'll be having a meeting with our state, local, and federal partners to discuss communication plans in and around Election Day and shoring up our cybersecurity communication protocols. All of this is really, really important. It's been very, very beneficial. I will say this: while I think Virginia has always had a very strong security posture when it comes to cybersecurity, one of the things that I think has been most impressive is our ability now to recover from an incident. So while we will do everything we can to prevent an incident, should there be an incident, we have plans, policies, procedures in place for us to get back up and running without having missed a beat. And that, I think, is the most critical thing that we've been able to do. And we've been able to do that because of the strong partnerships we've built around the country and with our federal, state, and local partners.
That's great. That's very reassuring, because I know that when there were foreign actors trying to make incursions into voting systems, Virginia was one that they tried to, and it was described to me as that they came and they jiggled the doorknob and it was locked and then they went away. But
Yeah.
you know, whenever they do that you know that they might try to come back. So I'm glad that we're taking all the precautions and making sure that we have, you know, redundancies and systems in place to protect the sanctity of our vote. Keith, can you talk a little bit about what local precincts are doing to ensure that poll workers and voters are safe on COVID-19 at the local precincts if they choose to vote on election day?
Sure. So fortunately, we had the experience of a June primary in the middle of the pandemic, and we've been very fortunate. Election counties and cities across Virginia have received a considerable amount of material from the state. With Prince William County has also provided a lot of material. Our Public Works Department actually built protective screens that we have in every precinct between the voter who comes in and the election officers that they're dealing with. We have masks. We require all of our election officers to wear masks during the day, and we strongly encourage any voter that comes in, if they don't have a mask, we have one available and offer it to them. And if the voter chooses or refuses to wear a mask, then we're encouraging them to vote curbside from outside. We also have more material from the state and the county. We're at because of the number of people that are voting absentee, we don't expect long lines at any of our precincts on election day, except perhaps at the beginning of the day, where sometimes people will line up at 6 o'clock to get in. So it's a relatively brief period of time that a voter will spend in the precinct, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, depending on what's on their ballot. So we're doing everything we can. We had a great experience in June, didn't have any problems, and so we're continuing to build on that and doing everything we can to make sure it's a safe environment, not just for the voters, but also for our election officers who are there for a very long day.
Yeah, and that's something that I saw when I went, because I voted early in person in Loudoun County, and they had little, they had big dots on the floor for where you had to stand when you were waiting. So everybody kept their social distancing and then moved up in tandem, and it was very organized and very good how it was administered. I'm glad to hear that you guys have adequate PPE and are ready for whatever comes on election day. And Chris, you mentioned something about moving a deadline to request an absentee ballot up, and I know that there are some important deadlines coming up in the near future. Can you just elaborate on what they are? Can people still register to vote in Virginia today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the deadline to register to vote in Virginia is Tuesday, October 13th. So you have a little less than, you have 7 days to register or apply to register to vote. But the other critical part about that is it's not just registering to vote, but it's updating your information. So if you've had a name change or an address change or anything that may affect where you vote or how you vote, we encourage you to go to our website. Actually, I encourage you to go to our website no matter what. Just check your voter registration status, ensure that everything is up to date and correct. You can also check where your polling place is. All of that stuff you can do at vote.virginia.gov. And it's incredibly important to do that because after October 13th, your information is static. You're not going to be able to change that after that date. So going forward from there, October 23rd is a Friday. It's the last day to request an absentee ballot to be delivered to your house by mail. If you're on the fence, you're not sure, do it today. Do it as soon as possible. You can always, if you're not comfortable returning it in the mail, you can always drop it off at a satellite location or at the general registrar's office. Very important to note. But October 23rd is the last day you can request an absentee ballot.
And that's at elections.virginia.gov that they can do it?
That's correct. And if you go /absentee after all of that, You'll be able to track your ballot. You can check your voter registration status. All of those things can happen right there. So on October 24th and October 31st, those are the Saturdays that the localities will be open for in-person voting. So we encourage, if you're not able to get out Monday through Friday and you want to vote early in person, those are the Saturdays that you can do so in person at the satellite voting locations or at the general registrar's office. And then, of course, the last day, and then, of course, is November 3rd, the general election will be open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. on election day for in-person voting.
So I'm sorry, when is the last day to vote early in person?
October 31st.
Halloween. Okay, that's easy to remember.
It's also a blue moon, but we're trying not to think about that.
Great. Okay. Well, those are really the questions that I had. I know that I've kind of hogged a bunch of time, so I want to see if we have some constituent questions. And Justin, are you there?
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
So let's get to our first question that was pre-submitted by constituents. And a reminder, if you're tuned in, you can drop a question in the comment section, and we'll get to that as well. So our first question is, what steps can Virginia take to guard against voter intimidation?
Well, this is something that, any attempt to dissuade or discourage voters from voting is illegal and shouldn't be happening. It's absolutely unacceptable. If people are encountering obstacles or intimidation when they're trying to vote, I think that they need to report that immediately to their local registrars and their local officials. And, we have some legislation in the House to shore up some of these things, but unfortunately our friends in the Senate don't share our concerns. So I'll toss it to Chris and Keith about what we can do to ensure that there's no intimidation of our voters as they're coming out to vote.
Well, let me just first say that you're absolutely right. There are already state and federal laws that make it a crime for anyone to intimidate or hinder or delay a voter from going into the precinct. And we've never had a situation, at least in Prince William County, where we've had to call the police or take some steps. Now, as you know, there at almost every election there are campaign workers outside the polling place, and there have been occasions where the campaign workers have become more aggressive than they should be, but we have a very close relationship with the sheriff, with the police department. They are very aware of where all of our precincts are. Our chiefs have cell phones. If there's any kind of intimidation, any kind of disturbance at their precinct, they can immediately call both the police and our office to notify us about that. And this there's a 40-foot line and from the entrance of every precinct. And so there can be no activity, campaign activity, anything else within that 40 feet into the precinct. But so we work closely with the local authorities, and they are available. We don't want them physically in the precinct, because that of itself can be seen as a form of intimidation. But we're doing everything we can, working with the local authorities to make sure that the precinct is safe for voters.
So if people are having to wait in line outside the polling place, if there's a big, during those AM and PM rushes, perhaps, and then they have to go beyond that 40-foot line, are you taking steps at the local precincts to ensure that people don't have to, run the gamut of the election people hanging out as the various local parties and things that are hanging out around outside, or is that just something that they might have to deal with?
Well, yeah. The law authorizes, in fact, the parties and other groups to conduct activities. It's a First Amendment free speech issue that outside of the 40-foot line, they can talk to voters. They can pass out sample ballots. There are certain, a number of things that they can do. In doing that, however, they can't block access to the line to get in. And if someone in line waves them off and says, "No, I don't need a sample ballot," that should be the end of it. They shouldn't be, bothering anyone. But as long as they're, there are some voters who would like us to clear all of those people out. There are some voters that are hypersensitive and say, "I don't want to see anyone. When I get out of my car, I walk into the precinct." Well, in fact, we can't do that. We can, we can make sure that nothing that is intimidating or delaying goes on. But outside of the 40-foot barrier, the campaigns and the parties are free to be out there.
Right. And my experience is they're generally very, very respectful of people's wishes. And if people don't want an absentee ballot, they leave them alone. So that's certainly been my experience. I don't think that that's the kind of intimidation that our listener was concerned about. And we seem to have lost Chris. I'm not sure whether that was technical difficulties. I know that he had another town hall that he had to hop onto right after this one. But in the meantime, I do have some questions, or I know Justin has some questions that you can answer about how those Dropbox ballots are processed and counted.
Sure. Thanks, Congresswoman. I'll read the question we got from the constituent here, and we are working on getting Chris back. Apologies for that. So our next question from a constituent is, she says that I have my ballot. I'm worried that if I use the Dropbox, that it won't be counted until after Election Day. So I am considering taking the ballot to the in-person vote early line and vote there instead to ensure that it's counted before or on Election Day. When will the Dropbox votes be counted, and when will the early in-person votes be counted?
Okay, so the Dropbox's ballots are being picked up every day at the end of the day and returned to the elections office. Those ballots will be processed exactly the same way that we process mail-in ballots that come back in the mail. The people who vote early in person, even though their ballot is scanned, and I voted the same day, the first day, my ballot was scanned on the machine, but it won't be formally tabulated or counted until Election Day, on the same day that we count all of the other absentee ballots, and the same time we count the ballots in the precinct. So as a commissioner described, we were very fortunate that we could do all the pre-processing. We can take every step up to pressing the button to say, okay, now it's time. The polls are closed at 7 p.m. Now it's time to count all those absentee ballots that came in, whether overseas email ballots, ballots that came back in the mail, ballots that were returned, through the drop boxes. And also, in fact, all those ballots that were cast in the early vote centers. Those are all actually processed. And at 7 p.m. on Election Day, that's when we start the actual counting and tabulation at the same time we do in the regular precinct. So even though the ballots are returned early, none of those ballots are actually counted and reported until after the polls close on Election Day.
And related to that, do you have optical scanners that you feed the mail ballots through, or the ones that were delivered through the drop boxes that are specific to absentee or mail votes, or votes that came in through the drop boxes versus the ones that are voted in person?
Well, no, the scans that we use are exactly the same scans that are used in the precinct on Election Day, but they're programmed to read and tabulate every ballot style in Prince William County. So they're scanned on the equipment, and they're all those ballots that can be scanned, whether they're mail-in, drop-in, those are all scanned on the equipment. And then there are certain ballots that we receive from overseas or email that can't be scanned on the machine. Those are all tabulated and processed by hand in the CAP precinct on Election Day.
And how will those ballots be, all those ballots for when people came in person to vote early at the central registrar or at the satellite locations, and the mail and drop off ballot boxes, ballots. How will they all be tabulated? How will they all be reported on election night? Are you just going to report what you have starting at 7 o'clock, or as soon as you scan whatever you have, or as you hit the tally button? And is it reported all under one big central absentee reporting? Because this is very different from in previous years.
Right, and at least for Prince William, I believe that we're required to report the results by congressional district. But basically, all the equipment that is being used now in the vote centers, at 5 o'clock on October 31st, we will close all of those scan machines. Those machines will all be delivered to our central absentee precinct. And at 7 o'clock, when we press the button to count all the mail-in ballots that have been counted, we also press the buttons on all those machines. And then the numbers that we report on election night will be a combination of everything that has been submitted, whether early in person, a Dropbox, or by mail. And so we break the numbers down by congressional district, but we don't break them down in terms of how the votes came in.
Gotcha. And is that consistent, Chris, throughout the Commonwealth about how they report the in-person versus the mail or other absentee?
Right. So the guidance, and actually Keith probably hasn't seen this yet, but the guidance that's about to go out is on its probably in his inbox. So yes, just like he said, all of the ballots that have been cast in person early at 7 p.m. They will begin to tabulate those just as they will all the in-person election day machines, and they'll tabulate that and start reporting those in. As far as the by mail ballots, in some localities, they will still be processing those well after 7 p.m. What we've asked is that by 11 p.m. they cut all of that off and present the results that they have to that point. And then from there, everything that's processed after 11 p.m. through Friday at noon, when all those ballots come in, will be reported again after Friday. So in Virginia, a large majority of our ballots will have been counted by 11 o'clock and be reported to the public by 11 o'clock. But there will still be significant number of ballots out as they come in, or maybe if the locality wasn't able to process them in enough time to be included in the election night results. So they'll be reported in a few days. But it's important to get as much information out there as we can. There'll also be a website that will be clear as to how many ballots, the percentage of ballots that remain outstanding, as opposed to the percentage of ballots that have come into the registrar's office. So you'll have a good understanding of what's still out there and left to be counted.
And in any election, there are some absentee ballots that are requested and never voted, right? So it's not like we need to wait for every single ballot to come in, just those that are outstanding that may come in before Friday at noon.
That's right. And there's another interesting part to this election as well. We had a lot of, and I'm sure Keith can attest to this, we've had a lot of voters who requested absentee ballots be delivered by mail. And then they're coming into the early voting locations and surrendering those ballots, meaning that they're giving up those ballots and casting a ballot in person. And so there could be situations like that on election day where somebody comes in with their absentee ballot, or maybe they don't have their absentee ballot, they vote provisional. But either way, there could be a situation where the ballot is still remaining out there, but they have in fact actually cast their ballot on the machine.
Gotcha. Very good. Justin, do we have any other questions from the audience?
We do, yes. Our next question is about voter suppression, and the constituent would like to know what actions have been taken by Congress to stop voter suppression and prevent people from discouraging voters to cast their ballots.
Well, this is similar to, I guess, the voter intimidation question. And this is something that we in the House of Representatives take very seriously. You know, I was very proud to vote for the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would undo a lot of the really most of the damage from the disastrous Shelby versus Holder Supreme Court case. But sadly, our friends in the Senate don't agree in making sure that people are protected in that way. What we're seeing in Texas right now, where you have one drop-off box for a county of 7.4 million people, is absolutely crazy, and that's something that legislation like our Voting Rights Advancement Act would be designed to stop. But I'm very pleased that in Virginia it sounds like we've got a wonderful system where it's safe, secure, and everybody can cast their ballot in the way that they feel is most best for them. But at the national level, I'm sad that we don't have as much support in other states. So I can toss that to Chris and Keith. I know you've already touched on this quite a bit, but if you have anything to add about what you've done for security and what things you think we could do better. I'm glad that we got the 400 million nationally in CARES Act, but I know that more funding would obviously be helpful to the state, but I'm glad the state has made it a priority.
Yeah, I would just say that the General Assembly this year really took a lot of great steps to open up and make voting more accessible. And they did so, before COVID, but ever since the pandemic hit, the General Assembly really acted to put in place for at least this November multiple options. I like to describe Virginia's voting in this presidential election kind of like Burger King. You can have it your way. So if you want to vote in person early, you can do that. If you want to vote by mail, you can do that. If you want to vote in person on election day, you can do that. And each one of those, there are options available to you to do so safely and securely without risking your health in order to cast your vote. For example, even if you're at home and you want to cast your ballot by mail, and we used to require a witness signature. If you don't feel you can safely get a witness signature, considering the pandemic, you don't need to have one. You can send it in without the witness signature. These are all very important steps to open up the process and ensure that anybody who wants to vote, is eligible to vote, can vote in a method that is safe and secure for them.
Great.
I guess one thing I would add, the commissioner did. He described that Virginia really is in a very good place. And one thing that we try and remind our voters when we hear about the things is say, look, don't focus on what's happening in Texas or Pennsylvania or, the District of Columbia, Maryland. Virginia runs our elections very professionally, and whatever may be happening in other states, voters have more options, more rights. And truly, we are not in a situation where we're going to have changes made 3 weeks before an election, and the process is in place, and so the voters in Virginia whatever is going on in the rest of the country, we can feel good about how our votes are going to be cast and counted here.
Great, thank you so much. Justin, do we have time for one more question? Do we have one more question?
We do. We actually have two more that I'll ask at once, and I'll toss it to our guest to answer. The first one, Chris actually just did touch on a little bit, but the question is, what do voters need to know about getting a witness signature on mail-in absentee ballots? And then our other one that came in through the Facebook comments is, if there is any error with the mail-in ballot, will the voter be notified so a correction may be made?
Good question.
So I can address both of those real quick. The witness signature, as I mentioned earlier, we're not requiring. The general registrars have been provided instructions not to reject a ballot for a missing witness signature. So if you're unable to get one, then you can submit your ballot without that witness signature. The second thing on the cure process is what we call it. So essentially, the General Assembly in the special session this year require general registrars that if a ballot comes back that would normally cause it to be rejected, so it's missing material information on the envelope, return envelope, then they have 3 days to contact the voter, notify them of the error. So they do that either by phone, email, or by a letter. Then the voter has until November 6th at noon to cure the ballot, which means provide the information necessary for the ballot to be counted. And Keith can probably talk a little bit more about the internal steps that they're taking in Prince William County. But these, again, are a number of wonderful things that the General Assembly has been able to do to ensure that voters have an opportunity to cast their ballot no matter how they choose to do so.
Right. So yeah, we will be starting the pre-processing next week here in Prince William, and we will have election officers that do most of the work. Teams that are we have Democrats and Republican election officers, and we'll go through each ballot as it comes in and open it. And as Chris mentioned, the most common mistake that a voter might make is to not fill out their complete address or not sign it. And so when that happens, we're setting up a system to notify the voter primarily by email or phone, and give them the information about why their ballot had a defect and how they can come in to cure that defect. That's actually another point that I wanted to make about just the transparency of the whole election process. So virtually everything we do is open to the public and to the political parties. So when we're programming the equipment that we use on election day, the parties are entitled to have someone there. The parties, and we have had observers at several of our early vote centers. The parties can have someone there all day. In every precinct on election day, the campaigns and the parties are able to have what's called an authorized representative inside the precinct during the entire day. And then if they think there's an issue that is problematic, they talk to the chief, and they can contact each party will have a boiler room on election day where calls about a machine went down or something happened that goes into the boiler room. And so, and the same way, when we're counting all the absentee ballots on election day, the parties are entitled to have an authorized rep inside there. So with all the changes that the General Assembly has made, there really is more transparency and opportunity in Virginia than in a lot of other states.
That's fantastic. And I think we're going to need to wrap up now. I know, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. And Keith, thank you for joining us. Do you guys have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we wrap?
I would just like to share, election administrators around the Commonwealth and around the country have all been dealing with a lot of change, and we're all going through this pandemic together. And, presidential years are always difficult. They're always tough, and they always test the system, and we always rise to the occasion, and that will happen again this year. I just want to point out people like Keith and our great administrators across the Commonwealth. They're friends and neighbors. They're people just like you and me. And I assure you that if you have concerns about the system, please reach out to them. Please reach out to us. We'll be able to allay those concerns because we've thought of them, I assure you. So if you're curious, go to elections.virginia.gov and defend-democracy. /defend-democracy. And we'll talk about our election security procedures, but we'll also talk about the great men and women around the Commonwealth who are serving you to ensure that your vote counts. And so thank you for the opportunity to talk to your constituents and educate them about the system, the process that we have in place. It's going to be a great year. It's a great opportunity to make your voice heard here in the Commonwealth.
So I would just like to close with a shout out to all the individuals all across the 10th district, but all across Virginia, really, that have stepped up to become election officers. In Prince William County, we have 93 precincts. We will have probably 1,300, 1,400 people on the ground, and we were concerned early on about whether we would have enough officers because of the pandemic. We've had a number of people step up to be election officers, a number of younger people. And so at least in Northern Virginia, I think all the counties and cities are in very good place in terms of election officers. But all the activity that we do, there's nothing, we could not conduct an election without all of those dedicated officers that are willing to spend the time, a long day, with us. And I guess one other message I would remind everyone, we have elections every year in Virginia, and we will get through this November election, and then next year we have statewide races for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, House of Delegates. And so, even if you're not an election officer this year, join us next year, because we have at least 2 elections every year in Virginia, and we need your help.
Excellent point, Keith, and that is absolutely true. So we get a lot of practice administering elections here in Virginia because we have them every year, at least 1 or 2. So that's for sure. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. I feel like this was a super, super informative discussion. I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing to keep our elections running smoothly in the Commonwealth. I feel very confident about what's going to happen between now and Election Day, and even after Election Day, in terms of ensuring that everyone's vote is counted. So if you're listening today, please make sure that you make your plan to vote, and that you vote in a way that is safe and best for you. You have lots of new options, so make sure whatever you do, vote. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you all.
Bye.